Next tonight, a chat about money and morality. It's part of economics correspondent Paul Solman's ongoing NewsHour series on making sense of financial news.
So, here's how this experiment worked.
One of the more memorable moments from the stories we've done about the Great Recession. Economist Dan Arielly, likening the behavior of consumers to that of dogs subjected to random electric shocks in psychological experiments.
The bell comes, and instead of jumping, the dog lays down on the ground, whimpering. And I think we're all kind of like this dog right now.
Arielly is a behavioral economist, a field he came to by accident, tragic accident, as he lay in a hospital bed for nearly 3 years, recovering from severe burns. It was plenty of time to ponder the irrational behavior of nurses who insisted on ripping his bandages off quickly rather than peeling them off slowly as he requested. Later, Arielly focused on irrationality in economics, a contradiction in terms, since the dismal science is based on the belief that economic behavior is supremely rational. On his website, Arielly takes the role of the Mac in the ubiquitous Apple computer ads.
Hello, I'm behavioral economics.
And I'm standard economics.
The Microsoft stand-in spouts the PC argument.
People are always making rational decisions all the time, not letting their emotions cloud their judgment, and always thinking about the future.
I just don't see how you can say this. We see stock bubbles. We see people overextending themselves on credit cards. We see people taking mortgages they shouldn't be taking. I just don't see where this rationality is coming from.
In addition to developing his website, Arielly has revised his international bestseller, Predictably Irrational, with new sections about the financial and economic crises, which prove, he says, just how irrational Homo economicus can be.
We've been doing experiments on irrationality for years, trying to show all kinds of different irrationalities. And we would show these results to standard economists. They will say it's very nice and very cute, but clearly all of these things will go away when we deal with professional people making repeated decisions in the competitive environment of the market.
Not only didn't those things go away, says Arielly, they brought the world economy to its knees. To some extent, standard economists and their equations have become the stuff of mockery.
My model is so much cleaner. I have formulas and algorithms.
Behavioral economists, by contrast, are in the ascendance.
I have experiments.
We sat down with Dan Arielly to discuss his experiments and his conclusions from them regarding the banking crisis and what, beyond the bailout billions, it might take to fix the system.
From my perspective, the real problem here is that we have a crisis of trust. We feel betrayed, we want revenge, there's anger, and there's a deep lack of trust in the banking system. And unless we think about how to fix the trust, nothing is going to actually move forward.
So what do we do to restore people's trust in the banks?
Well, one thing you could do is you could try and take revenge against the bankers and hope that this would fix it.
Revenge like cutting their salaries, putting them in jail.
Limit bonuses, change the tax code. We will exert revenge, we would feel good about it, it will not solve the problem. The real problem is that the bankers were facing a situation in which they could distance themselves from what they were doing. In fact, in the experiments we do, we show that the more distance you get from money, the more people can actually become immoral and still feel good about themselves.
Arielly has been studying morality and money ever since the Enron scandal made him wonder what made financial felons tick.
I started looking at experiments where we would tempt people to steal, and we would try to understand what really governs cheating in everyday life. In one experiment, I walked around the dormitory refrigerators one day, and I put in the refrigerator 6 packs of Cokes. And then I would come every few hours and I would measure how many Cokes are left. What's the half-life of Coke? And it turns out that Cokes disappeared very, very fast. People stole the Coke. When I repeated this experiment, but instead of putting Coke, I put a plate with $6 bills, nobody took the money.
So most consciences said taking a Coke wasn't stealing, like taking supplies from the office perhaps, but taking cash was. Arielly has since designed and carried out dozens of stealing and cheating experiments, in one of which people are given a reward for how many correct answers they got on a quiz, as reported by them.
We carry these experiments all over the world, and we found that everywhere people cheat just the same way. You go to Washington, D.C. and you measure politicians, they cheat a little bit, but just like the rest of the world. The one exception is New York. When we go to New York City and we check New York bankers, they are the only group that cheats more, and much more, by about twice as much.
Not that they are necessarily worse people, says Arielly, but because of the nature of their work, which tempts them with things that are easier than cash to rationalize stealing, like extra shares of stock via the backdating of stock options, say.
As we move to a society where we have less and less cash and more symbolic transactions, it might actually become easier and easier for people to be dishonest and still think of themselves as being honest. As a consequence of this, I don't think we can appeal to the moral compass to guide them, and instead what we need to do is to create strong regulations and make sure that we enforce those.
But even that, he concedes, may not be enough. Ever the optimist, though, Arielly has one more notion.
My real hope is that one bank will decide to be the good guy, that will create a system that it will be transparent, with no conflict of interest, with no hidden fees, and people will start banking with banks of this type, and more banks will have to compete. They will have to adopt the same approach. And if banks will start behaving like this, they will actually deserve our trust, and we will have a much better banking system.
A race to the top, says Dan Arielly, after so many years of economic behavior in exactly the opposite direction.